Story 1. I am a physician, an eye doctor. After 15 years of practice, my expectations for the average patient have declined. Last week, a patient told me he had read that vitamin D helps resist coronavirus infection and that he could get more vitamin D from sun exposure. He stared directly at the sun for 60 seconds and caused permanent retinal burns that reduced his vision with no chance of improvement. Story 2. One man I met said that English is the true language of God because the Bible is written in English. Story 3. I used to work in travel, and the number of people who did not understand the following was staggering. You cannot take a 3 to 7 night round-trip cruise from Miami to Australia, and no, your friend did not just book this. There are no ocean cruises that depart from Arizona. You cannot take a cruise from Miami to Hawaii and back in 7 to 10 days. If the airport is closed due to a hurricane, flood, or ice, you cannot demand a flight on a different carrier out of the same airport within the next hour. Also no, you did not just see someone book this. It is a shorter flight for your friends from the East Coast of the United States to the Caribbean than it is for you from Europe, and no one can change that. I will need your DD Form 214, the Certificate of Release or Discharge from Active Duty, to confirm a military rate. Your word that you were in a covert unit will not suffice, and I am not disrespecting the military by asking for proof. If a passport, visa, or travel vaccinations are required for travel, you must have them. A manager cannot override this because it is a government requirement. I have been doing this for 6 years, and no one you know knows more about this than I do. Story 4. Oof, good one. Okay, so my favorite was a guy planning his honeymoon who did not have much money. He was bummed about the cost of air travel. A friend suggested a train ride might be cheaper. He became frustrated after a few days of trying and complained that he could not find any trains going to Hawaii. It still did not sink in. He had seen pictures of trains in Hawaii and could not grasp that they were shipped there. It got even more surreal after that. Story 5. Customers argue their tattoo is backwards while their artist explains that the tattoo is fine. It only appears reversed because that is how mirrors work. Story 6. A girl in one of my college classes argued that heart transplants should not be allowed because that is where the feelings are, and the person receiving the heart would not be the same person anymore. Story 7. I work on aquatic habitat restoration in a spring-fed river that people often tube or float on. Many people have asked whether it comes back around so they can get out. Story 8. A friend of mine showered in cold water for a year because he never thought to turn the other tap to see what would happen. Story 9. I used to work for a chatbot app. Our app would text our users every morning with a greeting in a different language, for example, hola, bonjour, and so on. One day, a user accused us of being hacked. She said, "My name is Kim Smith, not Kim Konnichiwa. Someone's hacked my account." When we explained that our service had been greeting her in other languages every day, and that konnichiwa means hello in Japanese and her account was fine, she went on a racist rant and said Disney was behind the destruction of America. Story 10. My old boss had a morning routine of walking around the office with a bucket, watering all the plastic flowers. Story 11. I had a customer yell at me for putting her eggs in a separate bag. She said she did not want all those bags and that paper bags always rip. Before putting the eggs in the bag, I placed a 1-pound bag of flour on top. It was somewhat satisfying to see her face when we heard the cracks, until I realized I would be the one who had to clean it up. She also complained that we had not warned her about the fragility of eggs. Story 12. At the Department of Motor Vehicles, I went to renew my license. I was waiting in a room with the computers that people use to take the written test. The clerk sat a man down, looked him in the eyes and said, "If you pull your phone out, it is an automatic fail." The man said, "All right," pulled out his phone, and immediately failed. Story 13. The Georgia senator wanted to prevent sending troops to an island because he was worried it would capsize. Story 14. About half the calls I take daily are like this. People call 911 to ask whether Walmart is open, to report they did not get enough mayonnaise on their burger, or to complain that cleanup at a fatality wreck is taking too long. There is probably some level of mental illness and/or substance abuse present in those calls. Story 15. I get misdialed calls from random people who get angry because I am not the person they are looking for. It happens several times a year. Story 16. I once owned a smart car. A stranger approached me at a gas station and asked why I did not have a slow vehicle sign on the back, saying that all moped cars must have one. I tried to explain that it was a real car, just a bit smaller, but he would not accept that. He insisted I was driving illegally and was surprised the police had not stopped me on the highway. Story 17. My dad is a pesticide investigator for the state and heard this complaint from a local school board member as they stood in her 5-acre yard with 20 or more cats running around. I set out all these bird feeders and bird baths, but not one bird comes to my yard. I bet it is all those pesticides that the crop duster is spraying in the field. Story 18. At the start of working from home due to coronavirus disease 2019, a few users submitted tickets reporting connectivity issues. The tickets passed through 2 levels of support before reaching my queue. It turned out that the corporate wireless fidelity network does not follow employees home, and they need home internet service to connect to the virtual private network. Story 19. I managed a retail store selling teen clothing and primarily employed teenagers. One employee came into the back room while I was on break and asked what I was eating. The conversation turned to how I should have brought chicken for lunch because she wanted some. I told her I was vegetarian and do not eat meat. She insisted that chicken is not meat but poultry, and that vegetarians can eat poultry. She said grocery stores have separate aisles labeled meat and poultry, so they are obviously different. We argued for a couple of minutes before I told her to go back to the sales floor. She did not last long at the job, which surprised me. Story 20. You know the reason you bury a rattlesnake after you kill it? Bees will eat it and then they can sting people with rattlesnake venom. That was a man I heard constantly trying to pick up women on public transit. Story 21. I worked in retail for a few years, and it taught me that many people are either unwilling or unable to read. I had customers ask how much an item was, even though the price was clearly displayed on the item. It's $9.99, ma'am. How did you know? It says so on the price tag. Story 22. I worked with a woman who remarked that a friend of hers had lost a lot of weight. She wondered how many Diet Cokes her friend had to drink to do that. The same woman was convinced, beyond repair, that when you sneeze the air only comes out of your nose. There was no convincing her otherwise. Story 23. I teach 6th grade. One time a parent came to me after trying to help their child with math homework and asked, "What number is the variable x worth? It seems to change with every problem." Story 24. There is a considerable overlap between the intelligence of the smartest bears and the dumbest tourists. Yosemite Park ranger explaining why it is hard to design a bear-proof garbage can. Story 25. I worked at a bank. Mobile depositing had just become a thing. We received a picture of someone's cash for deposit. Story 26. A woman I used to work with insisted that any animal could reproduce with any other animal. She believed that sperm from any animal was the same and that DNA was irrelevant. She reached this conclusion after seeing some sickly, possibly deformed puppies and deciding they must have been half dog and half rat. Story 27. A former coworker was talking about how she wanted to go back to school to get her master's degree because she only had a bachelor's degree and wanted more job opportunities. I said, "Do you mean a bachelor's degree?" She insisted it was pronounced bachelorette when it was given to a woman. Then she led me back to her office, pointed to the word baccalaureate on her diploma, and said, "See? Bachelorette." Story 28. I had a bald man return a hairdryer because it burned his head. Story 29. Every time I put on my glasses to see better while looking for them. Story 30. I was at a party when someone's dilapidated truck got stuck in the mud. Instead of sobering up and returning the next day, a man made a Molotov cocktail using gasoline and threw it at the truck. The truck caught fire and was completely destroyed. Story 31. When I was in high school, we read a short story imagining what would have happened if the Japanese had retaliated with nuclear weapons after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A girl in my class raised her hand and asked, "Why does this matter? None of it is real anyway." The teacher asked her to clarify, but this girl thought World War II and the bombing of Japan were just from a movie and did not actually happen. The best part was that the girl was half Japanese, Edit. Wow. Thank you for all of the upvotes. I have many more stories about this girl, so maybe I will post some on a different subreddit soon. Story 32. I worked at a large grocery chain whose deli used scales that displayed the weight digitally, so 1.5 pounds would show as 1.50 pounds. A 35-year-old woman I worked with had to ask me to come over and tell her how much she had sliced every time she assisted someone. For over 4 months, she had passed the written and verbal tests they administer to verify that you can do this. She did not seem to have problems reading other signs or numbers, so I do not think dyslexia was a factor. It was very frustrating trying to do both my job and hers. Story 33. I work in information technology. A woman called from home because she could not connect to her virtual private network. I asked if she was connected to her home wireless network. She said she did not have home wireless. I then asked how she was connecting to the internet. She said she was using the cell tower and could see it from her house. While it is technically possible with a hotspot or a cellular card in a personal computer, she meant she thought she could get internet service via wireless directly from the cell tower. Story 34. A woman called a radio station to complain about deer crossing signs on a highway, saying the deer will see the signs and consider the area a safe place to cross the road. Story 35. When farms have trouble producing their crops and you ask some dipshit if that worries them, they say, "I don't get my food from a farm. I get it from Walmart." Story 36. When one of my nieces had a cold as a toddler and was breathing through her mouth, my former brother-in-law flipped out because he feared she would get carbon monoxide poisoning that way instead of breathing through her nose, which he considered the normal way. Story 37. I am an insurance claims adjuster. If you truly knew how many stupid drivers you are sharing the road with, you would never drive again. I avoid driving whenever possible. I have a car, but I take the bus to and from work. I never drive at night. Story 38. On September 11th, the general manager called his daughter, who was attending Arizona State University, to wake her up and make sure she saw what was going on. The customer service manager said, "It will not be on her television yet. Arizona is 2 hours behind us." Story 39. I work at a restaurant. We were low on tomatoes for our tomato soup, so someone grabbed potatoes to see if we could use them instead. Story 40. My mum unironically claimed that the moon was like 40 times the size of Earth. How that proves it was fake, I do not know. I hate to think she raised me. Laughing out loud. Story 41. I worked at Little Caesars and we were proofing dough for pizza. My boss said at 7 p.m. that the dough needed to rise for 12 hours and took out her calculator to do the math. I said that would be 7 a.m. Then she said the dough would expire in 48 hours and started doing the math again. I told her it would expire 2 days from now, and she said that is kind of weird how that works out. Huh? I quit shortly after that. Story 42. Not necessarily the exact thing you were looking for, but when I was in high school, I once had a friend come up to me bragging about his preliminary SAT. I recognized immediately that he had a pretty poor score. When I told him I did not think it was very good, he confidently said, "But it says I am smarter than 15% of juniors, and I am only a sophomore." I replied, "Yes, but imagine the dumbest 15% of people. That is not very good." Story 43. I had a friend who truly believed that magicians like Chris Angel and David Blaine had some kind of magical power or telekinesis. While watching one of those magicians on television performing on the street, he argued, "How could this be fake? Look at all those people. Can't fake all that. Has to be some kind of power or magic." I would then ask, "Do you realize that movies are fake? They create entire universes, planets, cities, war, and more." He did not understand what I was getting at. Story 44. I once worked at a Renaissance festival in South Florida. I had just turned 21 and gone down there for the winter to help out a musician friend, living very frugally. I did not even have a debit card at that point, and my cell phone was paper text at about 10 cents per message. I would get paid for booth sitting for some artists after the weekend, but by Friday I was pretty broke. I had about $7 in gold Sacagawea dollar coins because I liked to keep them on me at the fair to give out as change. I had the remains of the $20 I had taken in coins, and other than that I did not have any other cash. We had a kids' day at the fair where schools bring groups on field trips, and I needed to grab some food and get back to Deerfield Beach Park. Fully dressed in Renaissance garb, I ran into Taco Bell. I figured my cash would go the farthest there. I ordered my food, and when I went to pay, the girl behind the counter laughed and said, no, I need real money. I looked at her, confused. These are real money. They are Sacagawea dollar coins. Yeah, we only take United States cash here. I need actual money to pay for the food. The line behind me was getting antsy, and the girl at the register was getting really rude. I thought, what do you do when a business will not take your payment? It was not like I was trying to pay in nickels. I had $4 worth of food and tried giving her $5 in coins. I said, this is all I have on me. I do not know what to tell you, but it is legal tender. See right here. I was trying to show her the coins and she was yelling like I was trying to pay her in Monopoly money. The man behind me said, yeah, those are real coins. But he did not want her ire turned toward him, so he was not forceful. I asked if she could get a manager and she said, I am not going to waste his time with this. You either pay in real money or leave. And she grabbed my bag of food, so I could not go anywhere. I took out my wallet and remembered the two lucky $2 bills I had carried for years, folded up in the back pocket. I unfolded them and she took one look at the $2 bills and blew up. Next thing I knew, she was screaming for the staff to call the police and telling me not to go anywhere because I was trying to rip her off and pass off fake money and that they were going to see me in jail. I was hungry, tired, and very irritated, and then a police vehicle pulled up. They were not necessarily responding to the call. I do not even know if the store had called. I was ready to walk out, nearly in tears, when the two officers came in and all eyes turned to them. There were about 10 people now in line behind me, and everyone looked to the officers, who clearly had a "what is going on" expression on their faces. The register girl and two coworkers she had called over started waving my money around. She had taken my money and was refusing to give it back or to give me my food. The officers went to the counter to find out what was happening. The manager heard the commotion and joined them. The three teenage employees were all going on and on about the girl in the costume trying to give them fake money. And the officers quickly put an end to that. One officer held up the $2 bills and my Sacagawea coins and told the staff that both were indeed actual United States money. The girl kept protesting, saying, yeah, but it is not America money and we only take America money, until the manager finally realized what had happened and apologized, telling the teenagers, who looked completely in disbelief, that yes, the coins and bills were both genuine United States money. The manager offered to personally remake my meal, and the officers also apologized. I was really late at that point and did not trust them to make my food, even though the manager was being earnest. One officer said, I will come back and get your information while you make our food. So he accompanied the manager while he washed his hands and made our food. The other officer gave me my money back and took my information. As I was finally leaving with my food, the man behind me joked with the officer, I think I am going to pay with a handful of $50 I have in my car. What do you think? I was stunned that anyone could be so ignorant, and not just ignorant but completely unwilling to recognize they had made a mistake. Instead of admitting error, she doubled down, insisting we were all wrong and that I was a thief. It was incredibly frustrating. Story 45. An infantryman was told to trim the hedges. He lifted the lawnmower and his buddy started it. As a brand new medic, I spent about 6 hours pulling finger flesh and bone fragments from the hedges. For clarification, it was early 2004 after Operation Iraqi Freedom while with the 82nd Airborne Division. I was a private first class with only a year and a half in service. We bandaged him and applied a tourniquet temporarily. Senior medics took him to the emergency room. I was qualified in field sanitation, so I was left in charge of cleanup. That amount of time was excessive, but after we removed most of the flesh and bone, we hosed down the hedges, the ground, the grass where he bled, and the floors inside and outside where there was blood. Everything had to be rinsed and sterilized. The mower had to be rinsed and cleaned. It was damaged from the drop. The private who started the mower was disciplined by his non-commissioned officer. We finished about 4 hours of actual work with 2 hours of fooling off mixed in, because the sham shield is the real deal. Story 46. At a work Christmas party in a Mexican restaurant, an Irish colleague argued with the Mexican waitress about the pronunciation of jalapenos, saying jalapenos. He was not joking and became so upset at her mocking him that he made a scene and we were almost thrown out. Story 47. In 10th grade, we had a science test. The teacher gave 1 point for writing the date and 1 point for writing your name. The remaining 98 points were for the rest of the test. A student sitting in front of me scored half a point out of 100 because he did not write the date and only wrote his first name. Story 48. Just scroll down a web page or a Facebook feed and look at the advertisements. Examples include phrases such as only 2% can solve this puzzle and similar content. Those advertisements are posted so often because they actually work on many people. Story 49. One of my closest friends is a really good guy, but he can be a bit clueless. I'm learning Spanish, and I told him I was reading Don Quixote. I complained that it was difficult because it was written in 1605. He said, "Wait, Spanish existed back then?" Story 50. I was doing a coronavirus disease 2019 decontamination of a medical supply warehouse that had a confirmed positive employee not long before. While my team was inside performing the work, the floor and shift manager followed us without a mask, gloves, or any of the proper personal protective equipment, except for a high-visibility vest and steel-toe boots. I had to tell her to leave the room. I was fogging with viricide. Meanwhile, we were wearing full level C hazardous material suits with P100 particulate filters on our combination cartridge respirators, and all suit seams were taped. Story 51. A common trick is to call water by a scary-sounding chemical name such as dihydrogen monoxide to make people want to regulate or ban it. Story 52. High school history. Topic: Titanic. So the iceberg was about the size of a yes, Miss D. Don't icebergs fall out of the sky? To this day, I picture an iceberg the size of a small island falling from the sky, seen for hundreds of miles away like a meteor. Story 53. I once argued with someone over my own name. There are two pronunciations, German and English. They couldn't accept that I used the English pronunciation, even though we were speaking English and it is what I have used my whole life. Instead, they insisted I was lying to mess with them. Story 54. I knew a student who drank bleach to prove it would not kill him. A week later, he came to school after receiving medical treatment for the ingestion. When the teacher asked why he was bragging, he said he had proved his point. Mr. Hawk replied that without the treatment he would have died. He had stomach damage and an esophageal burn. The student was bragging about that. He was not mentally disabled, he was just reckless. Thank you all. Who would have thought my most upvoted comment would be about a student I once knew who drank bleach? Story 55. The fact that Florida had to tell people not to shoot at the hurricane. Story 56. People who cut holes in their masks because it is easier to breathe. Story 57. My ex had a student who occasionally misspelled his own name and turned in a very well-written essay that was clearly printed from the internet and included the web address at the bottom. He gave the student a grade of 0. The student's grandmother came to the office, distraught because she insisted her grandson had written the essay. Her proof was that he had said he wrote it. When the essay was shown to her online, she insisted he must have written it and posted it on the website himself. Fortunately, the principal did not accept that explanation. When I was a teller, I asked a man for identification. He showed me his personalized belt buckle. When I said that was not enough, he offered to get his sister from the car to confirm his identity. He did not understand why neither of those would work. He said he could not understand who else would wear a belt buckle with his name on it and why his sister would lie. She did not want any money. Story 58. Our town live-streamed a holiday parade for those who could not attend in person. It included a chat feature. One nearby mother wrote in the chat that her daughter did not get outside in time and asked the parade to turn around and return to her street. Story 59. People are surprised that the total death count keeps rising. It will always rise. If it were falling, that would be a different pandemic. Story 60. Someone argued with me because she was sure cavemen lived before dinosaurs and that dinosaurs never existed. She considered mammoths and saber-toothed cats to be dinosaurs. Story 61. I was sitting next to a girl who was notoriously dumb at our school. I thought people were being too hard on her until she straight up asked Google, "Who invented water?" Story 62. Many people still believe blatant pseudoscientific claims, for example that blood is blue inside the body when it is not exposed to the outside air. Story 63. The fact that I am a retail worker in 2020 and everyone thinks calling me a hero is going to solve all my crippling financial struggles. Story 64. Churchill said it best. The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Story 65. I am female and have a fraternal twin brother. In high school, a girl asked if we were identical. I said no, he is a guy. She asked whether we were genetically identical. I stared at her, wondering if she had skipped our science classes and did not know the answer. Story 66. I searched for my phone while it was in my hand, answered a call, and kept looking for it during the call. Thanks for the award. And wow, wearing glasses must be frustrating sometimes. Story 67. Some people believe the 5th-generation mobile network is responsible for spreading the virus. I do not understand how electromagnetic signals could possibly transmit an infectious virus. There seems to be a new low every month or year. Story 68. The flat earther who tried to launch himself into space and died. Story 69. On The Man Show, they set up a booth on a pier in Santa Monica and asked women to sign a petition to end women's suffrage. Many women signed. The program was meant as a joke, but the reality is that too many people do not understand that suffrage means the right to vote, not suffering. Story 70. A coworker asked me about a daily deadline I had set. I told him the time. He argued for 15 minutes that I was wrong and that the deadline was actually an hour earlier. I did not know what to tell him. Story 71. I work for a company that has a bonus pay system based on survey responses. I received a survey that rated everything 1 or 2 out of 10, 10 being the highest, yet the customer's comment said the service was fantastic and everything was great. Clearly, the customer completed the survey upside down. My district manager refused to invalidate the survey response, and I did not receive my bonus for the quarter. Story 72. A man I worked with, about 23 to 25 years old, was absolutely positive that the TechRax video where someone drills a hole in an iPhone 7 or iPhone 8, the first model without a 3.5mm headphone jack, to recreate the headphone jack was completely real. He insisted they did it to hide the jack from customers and that drilling was a hack to find it. I am a techie and I built another person's computer. He argued with me for 25 to 45 minutes about this. I pulled up diagrams, explained he would be drilling into the battery, and named the TechRax channel when he could not name the video maker because he had seen it on Instagram. I showed that the channel is misleading and I told him that if he could do it, I would pay for the iPhone in full. He was literally shopping for one. Another coworker who watched the argument and sided with him, despite knowing I am a techie and trusting me to build his $2,000 personal computer, said that his brother had just gotten that phone. They called him and he said it was fake. That was enough for them. My schematics and breakdowns were not. This man also had to get a ride home because his car steering wheel was locked, as most steering wheels are, and he played with it for an hour and could not unlock it. He is a mouth breather. Story 73. I had a patient who overdosed on heroin the other day. When we arrived, a friend at the house said she had poured milk down his throat, thinking it would reverse the overdose. Story 74. I was knocking on doors in Memphis, Tennessee, not the nice part. I told a resident I was from Connecticut. She said, "Oh my, when did we get a 51st state?" From that point on, I told people I was from the Big Apple. Story 75. I worked at a gas station in a ski town during the off-season. I needed the money. The town was at the south gate of Grand Teton and Yellowstone. A woman came in and slapped $1 on the counter. In the most Karen way, she said, "I want change for $1. That is 4 quarters. I said, "You are kidding. I am from Canada, and our dollars have 5 quarters. Thank you for sharing." She lit up with pride, took her change, and left. Story 76. When Italy was Europe's coronavirus epicenter, my supermarket sold out of all canned tomatoes except those labeled Italian. Story 77. I just finished tutoring 2 introductory computer science courses. The first lesson was about defining variables. There are students who still did not know that by the final exam. I understand people learn at different rates, but how did you not learn the first lesson after 15 weeks? About 20 homework assignments, 7 quizzes, and 2 previous exams. Story 78. People who think Arabic numerals should not be taught in schools. Story 79. I work at Costco. Before I worked here, I thought most people had common sense and were relatively intelligent. One example. We have a plastic shield at the desk by the door for protection during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic when checking receipts. People tried reaching around it, so we had to write receipts here with arrows so they would know where to put them. Now they try putting receipts through the plastic as if it were a window. Story 80. I have heard Joanne Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, has had to argue the pronunciation of her own name more than once. After explaining and defending my own name, I am convinced that more than half of people are below average. Story 81. A girl in my physics class asked if a suit made of atoms would be invisible. Story 82. I used to teach university students. They were 20 to 21 years old and in the second year of molecular biology, biochemistry, or microbiology. When I handed back assignments, I told them the papers were alphabetized by last name. Every week 90% of them flipped through the stack one by one, whether their name was Atkins or Zanzibar. They did not listen or learn. Story 83. Presidential candidate Marianne Williamson claimed in 2019 that the power of the mind could divert Hurricane Dorian from a direct impact on North Carolina and South Carolina. Story 84. A girl I know thought she was very smart for getting a 90 on an intelligence quotient test because it was 90 out of 100, so an A grade. Another time I walked past 2 girls talking in high school Valley girl voices, and one said, "It's amazing the Olympics are going on this year. They only happen once every 100 years. The other girl's response was, "Oh my God." Yeah. Story 85. When I was a sophomore in high school, a classmate asked to borrow a pen, and I lent him one of mine that had the Eiffel Tower on it. He asked where the building was from, and I said Paris. He gave me a confused look and asked where Paris was. Was it farther away than Chicago? It was my turn to be confused. We were in high school. How did he not know Paris was in France? I told him Paris is in France. He still looked utterly confused. I assumed he had misheard me and began to explain. France, from history class, World War II, Napoleon. He said he was bad at history and had never heard of France. He then asked if it was another state or a region of our state. Utterly baffled, I tried to explain that it was another country entirely and that it was in Europe. Exasperated, I said, "You know, Europe, that other continent." He still looked confused, so I added, "The land across the ocean." Finally, recognition crossed his face. He told me he had heard of oceans before and thought he understood. I remind you that this encounter with a student who did not know what Europe was took place in high school. Story 86. A 16-year-old new starter asked me at work whether the world was black and white before they invented color TVs. Nice guy, dumb as a rock. Story 87. I worked as a frontline tech support agent for a large internet provider. Pick any call. Customer. My internet is very choppy. I can't do anything. Tech. Can you describe what you mean by choppy? Customer. The arrow jumps all over the place. Tech. Do you mean the cursor? Make sure your mouse is free of debris and on a smooth surface. Customer. Mouse? I don't have a mouse. What would I want a mouse for? Tech. Are you on a laptop? Customer. No. I'm on my internet. I just bought this computer. Spent about 5 hours putting it together, and it doesn't work. Tech. The thing you use to move the cursor is the mouse. Make sure it's on a clean, smooth surface. Customer. Wait, that's not a pedal? I'm supposed to use that with my hand. Story 88. I work at a cupcake shop that does deliveries, and this happened today. A woman called angry, saying the cupcakes she ordered for her brother never arrived. This was concerning because all the morning deliveries had been completed. I frantically texted the delivery driver to ask what happened, in case it had gone to the wrong address, but the driver insisted it had been delivered to the recipient's assistant without problems. Since he was not in the office at the time, I called the woman back and explained. She said, "Oh, that makes sense. He hadn't asked if anything had come for him, so I'll tell him to ask for his cupcakes." I love when people jump to the worst conclusions about our staff instead of simply telling their loved ones they have a delivery and asking them to look for it. Story 89. One story stands out. I was working at a buffet that had decent prices. They served steak at the buffet and you could get a lot of expensive items for about 17 United States dollars per adult. A young couple came in on the weekend. For context, prices were a bit higher on weekends because that was when they brought out the bigger items like prime rib. The couple asked for 2 dinners and 2 drinks. I rang them up and told them the price. After tax, it was about 35 United States dollars. They looked apprehensive and asked to think about it. There was no one else waiting to dine, so I said I would take another customer's takeout order while they decided. They agreed. I rang in the man's takeout order. Takeout prices were determined by weight, so a reasonable amount of food to go was usually cheaper than dining in. The couple heard that the man paid about 10 United States dollars and decided they would also do a takeout order because it seemed cheaper. I explained the takeout process and they began filling containers. Later, they returned with 5 or 6 containers of food, all for takeout. When I totaled it, the price was at least 15 to 20 United States dollars more than it would have been if they had paid and eaten in. They returned the next day for more, paying at least 15 United States dollars extra each time compared with dining in. They really should have done the math. Story 90. Here is my story. I apologize for the length, but it is worth it. Years ago, I had to apply for some kind of government program. Cannot remember what. It was probably related to my children's health insurance, but that is immaterial. I had just closed a dismally failed business, which was why I was applying for the program. They had me fax all of my earnings and bookkeeping paperwork, most of which showed zeros or negative numbers. The person on the phone was looking at the papers I had faxed the day before. Finally, the agent told me he would transfer me to the financial expert. He used that phrase, financial expert. Remember that. It is important. After about 40 minutes on hold, I spoke to the financial expert. We went back and forth for a while, and she was obviously very confused. My paperwork was as simple and basic as you can imagine, like first lesson accounting. She sighed with frustration. After about 20 minutes, she asked what the word "so" meant. I got confused. I looked through the documents. The word "so" was nowhere on the papers. I told her she was looking at an exact copy of the papers I had in front of me and that the word "so" was not on any of the pages. To make a long story slightly shorter, it took me another 10 minutes to realize that she, a supposed government financial expert, was mistaking the numeric designation for no money $0.00 for the word "so." A financial expert did not know that $0.00 meant no money. That was the moment I realized George Carlin was being generous when he said to picture how stupid the average person is and then realize that half of them are even stupider than that. Story 91. I deleted my Facebook feed because I was getting too angry about something I cannot change. Story 92. Watching someone wear a mask in the grocery store, then take it off to sneeze into her hand. Story 93. My stepdad thought aluminum foil was safe to use in the microwave. It is not. The black spots in my microwave confirm that. Story 94. A girl I went to college with thought the capital of Kentucky was bluegrass. Story 95. I used to work at an ice cream shop and sold custard by the pint or the quart. People would ask for a pint, receive their order, and say, "Oh no, I wanted the big pint." Story 96. The people who bought all the toilet paper left the rest of us regular people without a way to wipe ourselves. Story 97. Groups of people leave their homes to block roads to a hospital because they are upset that they cannot go out. Story 98. My family is full of morons. The best one was when my cousin walked into work one day. I looked up and said, "Oh my God, can you believe they now put a limit on how many times you can breathe in a day?" She replied, "How am I supposed to do that?" Another time she thought the string attached to a balloon on a table was stiff and holding the balloon up. She has run out of fuel multiple times and called to say she was broken down. She has children. Scary world. Story 99. American voters were surveyed about which they preferred Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act received drastically higher support. Both names refer to the same program. Story 100. I used to work in customer service for a bank, and that job showed me how very stupid people can be. A very common issue involved people who called with a question about their account but refused to give me any information about who they were, such as their date of birth, the numbers on the back of their card, address, and so on, because they thought I could be a scammer. They had called us, but I could not access their account unless I knew who they were. So what did they expect me to do? Another frequent case was people calling our bank about their account despite never having been customers of our bank. I would spend ages trying to find their account while they got angry and accused me of being incompetent. Then they would find their card during the call and it would turn out to be with another bank. How do you even make that mistake? Story 101. Story 102. I argued with my sister for half an hour that people in Mexico speak Spanish and that there was no such language as Mexican. At the time, I was in my second year of Spanish class. My sister refused to believe me. Story 103. You can't drive to Alaska, stupid. It's an island, an adult said. Story 104. A client complained that his phone had been stolen from the swimming pool where I work. He claimed someone broke into his locker, took his phone but not his car keys or wallet, and then locked the locker again. Turned out he had changed into swimming trunks, left his phone in his pockets, and taken it into the pool with him. Story 105. The number of people who seemingly failed, skipped, or did not pay attention in high school science classes such as biology and chemistry. Story 106. I have an ex who refused to believe people can have different body temperatures. He would get annoyed if I was cold, and he was not because he thought that was impossible. Story 107. An ex-coworker once asked why we do not use helicopters as a cheap way to reach space, since they can fly straight up. Story 108. When someone asked me if there was meat in beef and barley soup and I said yes, she responded, I do not eat meat. I will have a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. My head almost exploded. Story 109. Honestly, read the Facebook comments under any news station. I sometimes read them, get annoyed, then step back and think, Master of Puppets 8986, why are you doing this to yourself? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.